Okay. Hi, Aparna. So lovely to see you. And thank you so much for joining our second episode as part of Between the Sheets. We're so happy to have you here and welcome.
Thank you, Zara. Thank you for thinking of my book and inviting me to share a few thoughts on it. It's my pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And also, let me just introduce your book as well as a little bit about you. Today we're going to be talking about Aparna's book, which he also mentions is a zine, called 24 Slides, and that's that's what it looks like. And it examines the personal archives and found photographs and overlays them with childhood memories of a time of war. Growing up for a brief time in Iraq has left a deep impression on my sister and I. This is Aparna has sent this across. And we often think of the place and the people, the futility of the war, and its impact on people's lives. Through this work, I look back into history through a tourism booklet from the 1970s and attempt to read the images and texts as evidence and offer counter perspectives through my own experiences. And just a little bit about Aparna herself. She's a lens-based artist who lives between Singapore and Bangalore, and her work is mainly rooted in personal memory, identity, and experiences, taking form and shape through photographic interventions and narratives. So we're very excited to go through this little memory archive with you today, Aparna. So going forward with talking about this idea of when you meet got together these 24 slides, and there is a portion in the book where essentially this portion where
Mm,
the images have sort of bent
mm,
within themselves. And is
mm.
that something that would you say was sort of like a starting point also when you realized that this is when you actually wanted to go forward with this project? Was that visual prompt something that kind of resonated with you?
It's interesting that you make a mention of that, the cover page, because when I first scanned slash photographed this cover, the slides sort of sit in an old plastic. Uh, it has a bit of a cover where you
Like a
slide
sleeve.
the photograph. Yeah, it's sort of a sleeve with
Mm.
which over time sort of became very, folded up and old. When I first saw it, actually, it to me felt like there was something hidden. You can't really make out the image clearly when you look at it.
Right.
You can sort of see it masked, almost like it's
Mm.
hiding a different meaning or something within its folds.
Mm.
Which is why I retain that as the cover page, because as you uncover the book, as you open and leaf through it, uh, you start getting more and more perspective in
Right.
small layers. That was the intention of that cover.
Okay. Okay. And you have all of these little memories that you make in tiny boxes. Was that a play on the fact that your imagery was very much in these like little square shaped sheets that, I remember from our childhood when we would find these books and we would see that they had like particular shapes, we'd cut them out thinking that these were meant
Mm,
for our
mm,
projects.
mm.
So I was just wondering if that's something that you were thinking about when you wrote your memories in these little square shapes.
The first version of the dummy actually had typewritten text of all of these
Mm,
memories.
mm,
And I somehow felt it was very impersonal.
mm-hmm.
Um, and somehow I knew that I had to change the form in some way.
Right.
They are childhood memories, and they are sort of you tend to um, categorize them in your own mind. At least I tend to categorize them in my own mind and in little boxes, and that's the way that I remember things.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
it's the way I think I'm visual. I'm a very
mm,
visual person, and I only remember it when I have sort of a little um, visual note that I make for myself. And
yeah.
in my head, they were those boxes. And
Mm,
interestingly enough, they sort of match
yeah.
the photographic slides on the other side, which wasn't the intention, but when it actually fell into place like that, I thought maybe it was meant to be that way. Uh,
Right.
but I also wanted to break the formality of those boxes by some of the text also sort of flows between and
Yeah.
outside of it,
Right.
because that's also the way we connect memories through with each other. So
Right.
there's that fluidity of also bringing in some of these free flowing text in between.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this bit, where you said sort of highlight the words in English,
Hmm.
is that something that you found in newspaper cuttings that you then reinserted into the spaces to translate
Yeah,
them?
so this text was part of the tourism book.
Hmm.
And I can't read Arabic anymore. I used to possibly read many, many years back. So, of course, one went to Google Translate to sort of do a very basic version of what is the text saying, really.
Right.
And I was very struck by some of the phrases that popped out, which is
Hmm.
progressive,
Yeah.
equality, and diversity. There's one phrase that talks about minorities enjoy cultural and national rights,
Right.
social, progressive, freedom to practice.
Yeah.
They really leapt out to me, and that sort of even very strongly underlined the fact that it could be a propaganda tool, because
Right.
at the beginning of the Iran-Iraq war, it's essentially Saddam's war uh, to capture, it was based around a religious agenda. It was based around a geopolitical agenda. And as we all know, Iran was, seen in a particular way politically. And it almost felt like the government is trying to find allies in the West, and you'll find allies in the West when you use language of a particular kind.
Right.
Um, to me, that was the reading, and I wanted to highlight that text so that it also uh, reinforces this whole idea of why I was seeing it as a propaganda booklet.
Hmm. 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 And going by that, um, did you at all have, while you were younger, did you at all have a little diary of sorts where you wrote any of these memories down, or did you kind of resurface them when you were working on this booklet?
We speak a lot, my sister and I, of the times that we grew up in Iraq. Very strangely, though,
Mm,
I don't know what it is about that time that over the last many years, whenever we meet, we sort of remember. Do you remember
mm,
this friend who she taught us how to read the alphabet, or she taught us how to play this particular local Iraqi game.
mm,
Um, but it's very latent, right? It's
right.
almost like I give this example of when you're making a photographic print,
Yeah.
when you expose the print, the image is latent. It's
Yeah.
You can't see it, but the image is there. And it's sort
Right.
of almost like when I opened that box of memories, all of the latent images sort of became very coherent and became very clear to me, um,
Mm,
which felt right.
mm,
And there's also this other uh, thought that I always mull over, whether our memories are defined by the photographs of
yeah.
them that we have. Yeah,
Right.
I always wonder about it. If that photograph didn't exist, Do we
Mm.
still remember, have memory of that place and the time? There is one negative from that box of this really old, dilapidated ambassador car, which used to sit in front of our house for
Mm.
years, like the 4 or 5 years that it's been just sitting there. If I
Mm.
don't have that image, would I remember that car, that ambassador car sitting there? Or
Right.
so I sometimes wonder, this relationship that we have with photography is it's interesting. It's
Yeah.
what reminds, what follows what.
Correct.
So
Correct.
yeah, it's also in some way I was sort of exploring these themes as well. To they're not apparent, but those were also the thoughts that were going on in my mind as I was putting them together, or as I was layering them together.
You know what I find really interesting as well is that, um, even though the zine in itself is so, like the thought behind the zine is rather heavy, right? Because you're talking about like an entire regime, and like the propaganda that kind of follows it till date. And also, we're very aware of the fact that the memories that exist there are not always light. In fact, there's more percentage of heaviness to lightness there. But
Mm, right.
with the zine specifically, even though you talk about certain things like, your mother covering the wall with like these little
Mm,
flower curtains, to me it seems like there is an innocent lightness that exists throughout in your writing. And I think it's probably because of the language that you use to not elaborate the memory, but just sort of give a snippet of the memory and then let the viewer kind of envision what happens or what follows. So it's sort of like going through, like you said, different boxes of your mind, but just a glimpse of it. And I think in the way that you've written it, it also allows the viewer to go back into your childhood. It's not you as an adult writing this now, it's you as a it's sort of like the child in you that's going back to writing these memories. So that's just something that I noticed that I'd like to
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about.
Thanks for sharing that. Because a lot of times when we see certain things as a grown up, right? We have our own
Mm,
baggage. We
yeah.
see it through a different lens, and it's really hard for me to, the iterations of that text that I made, so many
Right.
of them, because even more simplifying it so that it doesn't come across as being patronizing or heavy-handed, or um, it has to be gentle because it is an
Mm,
observation, or it is a thought that was in my head many years back when I was a kid.
right.
And I have to go back, even for me as an exercise, to be able to um, take the burden of it. I don't want
Right.
me to carry the burden of all of what came later and what I know of the place now, because I
Right.
really have fond memories of the place.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do want to go back, and we speak again um, about that. If ever I have to make this into a long-term project, can I
Mm,
go back and
mm,
see what it means? Because we tend to think of the world as a binary, right? With the good people and the bad people. And that's something that I constantly tussle with, is binary. There aren't really. And
mm.
I'm being overly simplistic here, but when there are two countries at war, we say, oh, good guys, bad guys. And that's
Yeah.
how we also tend to support each other.
Right.
Um, but we forget that it's about the people.
Yeah.
What's happening to the people who are there in that place, in both sides of the border?
Right.
And I wanted myself to remember the people more than the war, more than the agendas, more than the political rhetoric. I want to
Hmm.
remember the people because the people made the place for me. So yeah.
Right. 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 And just interestingly, it's I visited Iraq, visited Najaf and Karbala about like in two, I would say about 7, 8 years ago. And
Oh, amazing.
so I also have like this childhood, not well, teenagehood feeling of I do want to go back, and I because I remember those markets. I remember the energy that was in while buying the fruits and buying the vegetables for like our morning breakfast, and of course the bread. And I think like those are memories that came to me first when I was looking through your book. That I felt like the atmosphere of the space. And it's just interesting to me how, even though, this was made as, oh, one sec, I'll just, as it, uh, defined as a photo booklet published by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting in Iraq in 1978. And still in, say, 2016, 17, I'm looking at it, but my memories of it aren't so sanitized. I'm
Mm,
bringing my own childhood, teenagehood memories into it. So I just find it interesting that photography has the power, like you said, to like pull forth a memory that you might not know that existed. So
you're
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, that's an interesting
yeah, that.
observation, and it's amazing that you actually visited the place, like, as well. Um, because I haven't met anyone who also visited Iraq at any
Right,
point, and
right,
hopefully
right.
this yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But here's hoping that you can go back and bring forth a lot more memories
Yeah, true.
to continue this.
There is a photographer friend of mine who uh shared with me a few years back that photographs that we have of that time of us will also exist in albums of other people who were
Yeah,
also in that place and time with us, right? And it
right.
got me thinking that friends of ours who we grew up with there, they might have images of us,
Yes,
of my family or the people I knew in their albums, and what would that journey be? So this is sort of a preoccupation now, thinking uh, maybe that's an exploration that I need to follow, because at some point in
mm,
my art practice, I'm also wondering. Uh, I make images in this time, in the
mm,
present.
mm,
Uh, but my relationship with photography could also mean that I sort of go back into the past to see uh, what else was there, and and
right.
and and I just have to. I just want to bring in this quote that I often look at when one is looking at archival material. There is a photographer called uh, Stanley Stanley Wanambwa. He's a Ugandan British photographer. In one of the magazines, he mentioned that the resurgence of archival projects in the photo book suggests an eagerness on the part of many artists to explore the intersections or indeed presences of the past in the present tense.
Yeah,
I see a lot of artists who
yes,
uh, are looking at archival material in multiple different ways. And that's, to me, very, very energizing, thinking the possibilities are so many. How are
right.
we looking at photography just beyond making the images,
Yeah,
right? And I'm always curious to see how are artists bringing out that body of work? What are
yeah.
their explorations?
And in fact, going from that point, I know a few photographers who are using their own family albums to recreate the images in the now, but using
Mm,
themselves, and
mm,
a lot of my peers, the women identifying photographers, have kind of used their mothers or their grandmothers or their great grandmothers as subjects, but are now placing themselves into those instances in a
mm.
context of now. So I just yeah, photography is kind of like block building. It keeps going. So I
There are
think that,
multiple entry points to it, right? And
yes,
I find it fascinating that we are still able to enter that path from a different place,
yes,
and yet be able to discover something very new, or and because it's also personal. A lot of the
Yes.
work that I know artists are now exploring is also very personal, and that makes it so unique. And in some form, that's also the voice of the photographer in a way.
Right.
So it's, yeah,
Yeah.
there are so many possibilities to it, and I'm really curious to see what else comes out of yeah, out of this.
Thank you so much, Aparna. This has been such an insightful, journey into memory and and the present itself. So thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with us, and hopefully it brings forth a lot more conversations in the future.
It's my pleasure, Zara. It's really my pleasure to speak with you, and thank you once again for thinking of my book, and allowing me to share some of my thoughts on it.
Yes,
Look forward to more
absolutely.
conversations.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.